Hello everyone, Steve Goodwin here with my anchor test video number 145. This lovely anchorage is a place I've been visiting for more than 30 years, and what I've been finding is that Panopè's anchors will drag about half the time using something less than full reverse thrust. Now, this has never caused a overnight or an unexpected drag. Tend to carry oversized anchors, and the winds during the evening are usually fairly calm. However, my curiosity has been very high as to just what is going on down here, and the reason I don't know is because during the summer times, the seafloor is always completely covered with a thick, heavy weed, so I just have never been able to visually identify what is on this seafloor. Well, that has finally all changed. I went ahead and brought the skiff up here during the fall of 2022. I focused on in the anchorage at the head on the south side. You see that red circle? I went ahead and dragged 20-pound range anchors continuously along that track. It's about a 100-foot drag for each anchors, and this is just what we find.
21-pound Bruce Watt mount.
So it turns out to be a rocky seafloor. None of these rocks are, say, bedrock. They're all just loose stones, varying in size from, say, grapefruit on up to diameters of maybe 2 or 3 feet. Let's say that those are several hundred pounds each. Now, this 21-pound Bruce anchor never was able to penetrate even when it was amongst the smaller rocks. The only time it made good holding power is right here, and 2 other times when it was wedged in between the larger boulders. You'd think that heavy rock there would have been really hard to move, but no, it was only 195 pounds that it would hold, and then at 240 it was dragging and just sort of rolling the rocks out of the way. I'd say that the 3-pronged nature of these Bruce anchors is probably a benefit here. I think having a wing sort of out each side gives the opportunity to sort of wedge in and grab a hold of more than one rock at a time. But it certainly was not effective at burying itself amongst the boulders. All it could do was just sort of catch an edge on a rock from time to time. Next is the 23-pound Lumar claw. So one thing we have to talk about right off the bat is that with a seabed that is irregular as this, there is absolutely no way to conduct a fair and accurate holding power test comparing these anchors, because it's just going to come down to the luck of the draw of how these anchors land between the larger rocks. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the maximum holds for each anchor, and for this anchor, only one time through this whole 100-foot track that I pulled it through did it hold 135 pounds, and then it was dragging at 195. So it is less than the Bruce, but again, take those comparisons with a grain of salt because they are really dependent on the luck of the draw of how they land amongst the rocks. Next is the 26-pound genuine CQR anchor, and one thing I noticed that could be a benefit for this style anchor is the fact that the anchor tends to lay on its side. Certainly in normal seabeds that's a bad thing, but this high stability on its side means it's sort of always got a hook shape stuck out to one side ready to grab a hold of a boulder, and that's just what happened right here. And when those Bruce anchors caught a hold of something, it tended to roll them over. The stones would roll. In this case, we'll see that this boulder there at the top of the screen will begin moving along with the anchor. And again, I think that's because the anchor is sort of hooked down underneath the stone. Might be a small benefit. Again, there's a high degree of just luck here, depending on how the anchors encounter these rocks, but I think there might be something to that. The anchor did hold fairly well. It's the best so far. It was 315 pounds of holding. And we see here in the smaller stones no real ability to penetrate and generate holding power in the normal manner. Next anchor is the 20-pound Danforth 18H. Really, there probably wasn't much business of this anchor being used in rocks. It's more of a specialty anchor for softer seabeds, but there's certainly the chance someone who uses these as a primary could inadvertently deploy this amongst rock, and, well, this gives us a little idea of what could happen. It was fairly uneventful. None of the stock or any of the appendages caught up into the rocks significantly. There is some chance that that stuff can bend, and these are known to be not the strongest anchors of the bunch. But in any event, the anchor was fairly consistent with fairly low numbers. 3 times it hooked up and held 135 pounds only. Next is the 24-pound Delta anchor. It did get lucky and landed right amongst some larger boulders and had one of its highest holds here. It's about 240 pounds. Again, might have just been luck. After it released from there, though, it really didn't do anything noteworthy. Lots of bouncing around in the rocks, sometimes upside down, sometimes on its side. Once it kind of got its toe dug into some cobble, but no, nothing very noteworthy about its behavior. This is the 21-pound Excel, and I'll mention that its big brother, the 50-pound Excel, was an anchor that I came here when I was cruising this season. That was summer of 2022, and the larger Excel was able to hook in and hold full boat thrust in reverse. That's about 700 pounds, just once out of 4 tries. 2 of those tries, it was almost nothing, and then 1 of those 4 held about half of the reverse thrust. As far as this smaller 21-pound version, once I got it to hold 195 pounds. Otherwise, it was just doing lots of bouncing around. Next is this 15-pound aluminum Fortress FX23. I think there's a couple things that's worth mentioning here as we watch the anchor move along the seafloor. One is that aluminum, there's a known fact that it has more friction than steel or galvanized steel. Not sure if it's a molecular thing or if perhaps on some small scale the aluminum being softer than the rock sort of embeds into it. But in any event, maybe that extra friction did help this anchor. It did have a 240-pound hold at one point. Another thing that's noteworthy is that the anchor did not deform. It's certainly not as durable a material as the galvanized steel, and this anchor, like the Danforth, is not designed for this at all. It's more of a softer, maybe soft muds and sand type specialty anchor. So, again, I think it's noteworthy. It's totally an inappropriate anchor for this seabed, yet it seemed to perform quite well and not be damaged at all. Now we're back to non-pivoting steel anchors. This is a 17-pound Mantis M1. I think it's noteworthy to mention that the extra large-sized roll bar, it's large diameter. There's those kind of wings that set it outboard of the main area of the fluke, and I think that just gives it more opportunity to get caught on rocks. Now, I have bent this very roll bar back just in a soft mud during a straight line pull, so it's certainly possible to bend that roll bar if it got caught into rocks. However, I will mention that it did not bend during this at least 100-foot-long drag amongst all these boulders. Anchor does only weigh 17 pounds, so it is the lightest steel anchor we've seen so far, and it did have a 240-pound hold at one time. That puts it at the greatest holding power per anchor weight of any of the non-pivoting fluke anchors. Only that aluminum Fortress was greater. Next is a Mantis M2, also 17 pounds. Notice that it does have the same sort of outward protruding wings or ears on the fluke there, but of course this one doesn't have the roll bar, so perhaps it is not as likely to catch on rocks that are close to each other. So I just ran directly right into a rock there, but quickly kind of slid or rolled up and over it. Here it's wedged its toe just dead center on another big boulder, but it didn't take much, and the boulder shifted and off it went on another drag. Its best hold was when it wedged into this large boulder, and it was 195 pounds steady, and then up at 240 here it starts moving the whole thing. Next is the 32-pound 1945 Navy anchor, and it really didn't do anything great here other than not bend. In fact, in all the testing I've done since I bought this anchor just secondhand at a flea market, about the only thing I can say that's really good about it is a nice visual shape, so it'll make a fine ornament somewhere. Unfortunately, all the underwater footage for this 22-pound quickset anchor disappeared. All I can say is that it held once at 195 pounds.
Rockna Vulcan.
Next is the 22-pound roll bar Rockna, and this anchor produced the lowest holding of any of the anchors. It only managed to hold 100 pounds of pull. It did it 6 times, so it was very consistent. It did get dragged the entire 100 foot or so of this course that I've been using for all the anchors. I stress again that any kind of seabed like this that is so irregular, luck could certainly have a part of it. But, well, there may be some reasons why. In terms of the other roll bar anchors, this has a more compact roll bar. It just doesn't have as much stuff sticking out. The anchor is not terribly heavy on the tip, so it did spend quite a bit of time on its side and even upside down at times. The toe of the anchor did manage to penetrate into the cobble a couple times, but just wasn't really anything there as far as holding goes. Again, 100 pounds was the most it could do. Okay, next is the 21-pound Spade S60. Now, Spade anchors are ballasted with lead, and they have among the highest tip weights of any anchor, and that has translated into this anchor remaining more upright than any other anchor that I tested in this seabed. Unfortunately, it did not translate into terribly high holding or resistance numbers. Here we see it kind of rolling this rock along, kind of like a soccer ball, and again, that didn't result in much. But as you'll see here, if it does go on its side right away, it ends up back upright, and numerous times it had its toe dug in. The most holding was only 135 pounds. It's a fairly narrow anchor. There aren't protrusions sticking out, and it's more and more I'm thinking that those kinds of elements are a help here. Just more opportunity to grab a hold of stones as it goes by. The fact that the anchor is upright also means maybe it won't hook into rocks as well as, say, like the CQR did at the beginning of the film. Next is the 21-pound Viking anchor, and like the Spade S60, this anchor stayed upright much of the time. It's for a completely different reason. It's more of a shape, kind of being broad and flat along the bottom. It's also got the wide roll bar attachment, kind of like the Mantis M1. Unfortunately for it, it did not result in it hooking into rocks particularly well. The max hold was only 135 pounds. Had plenty of opportunity. It did get dragged through lots of big boulders, sometimes multiple right next to each other, but for whatever reason, maybe just luck, it just never did hook into anything real solid. Here's some interesting slow motion footage of a fairly large stone kicking up and flying through the roll bar hoop. I should probably consider it quite fortunate that I did not destroy a camera during all this dragging. Last anchor is the 21-pound Rockna Vulcan. It also had a fairly low maximum. A couple times it held 135 pounds only. Not much else noteworthy about it. It wasn't terribly stable in any orientation, sometimes upright, sometimes on its side, and it also spent quite a bit of time completely upside down. Fairly stable there for several feet as it was being dragged along. Here at the top of the screen you can see the bottom of the fluke. Okay, that's a wrap for this rocky anchor test. I'd like to make a correction. In the film I said there was no damage to this aluminum fortress anchor. Well, indeed, the tips have been worn down. I didn't look close enough, but sure enough, those sharp tips are now a bit more blunt. It could be brought back with a file easy enough, but that's certainly something to note. So then the next best anchor was the 17-pound Mantis M1, and as I mentioned in the film, the broad, wide nature just simply gives it an easier opportunity to catch on rocks. But I have to stress again that the element of luck is a big factor with all these results. So that's why I'm not really going to rate the anchors, and I'm not going to publish those ratings or rankings on any of my charts. I think there's lots of people who kind of just focus on the charts without watching the film, and if they did that, in this case, they would be led astray. So if those test results are not really reliable, you might be wondering, why did I publish the video at all? And believe me, I came close to scrapping the whole thing. But I figured there was at least some good information or takeaways that we could get from that. Number one is the fact that I didn't know what was on that seafloor. I've been going there for 30 years, and it wasn't until going there here in the off-season when the weed cover left with a camera I was able to figure it out. So that's number one. Number two is that seabed type pretty much doesn't matter what you put down there in terms of anchor style or brand. It's all pretty marginal, and really the only answer is going to be a very large anchor. You might say, well, maybe we could use multiple anchors, maybe on their own roads, or maybe even a tandem would be better, and I think it would. The problem is that prior knowledge thing. You'd have to know ahead of time that you were going in this rotten anchorage, and then if you did know that the anchorage was that rotten, you could just go somewhere else where the seabed is better. So to really cover all your bases, at least in a geographical area like this, and if you're going to tuck into the more of the little nook and cranny type anchorages, the only answer is just size. You just need as big an anchor as you can possibly carry. Okay, before I sign off, I thought I'd show you my winter project for Panope here. So I've got the propeller and the shaft out. I'm going to be getting a new cutlass bearing and a new shaft, but that's all just secondary. The primary thing that's going on here is I am converting this formerly empty keel space that was just a damp, musty bilge. It's all been cleaned up in there, and I'm going to weld in plates along the top, along that blue line. That's going to be the top of new fuel tankage. These are all going to be communicating, so consider it one tank of about 45 gallons. Previously, my fuel was stored in separate tanks that were basically above waterline, and the tanks themselves were heavy, and more importantly, the fuel was in a, let's just call it, not ideal location. So we're going to get the fuel much lower, so it's better for stability, and the whole boat is going to end up being lighter because those tanks that I had built previously, well, they were fairly heavy. Here's a peek inside. We'll see that I've had to move the engine forward to gain access to this new fuel tank area. Lots of projects to do. The fuel tank that's still remaining here on the port side, that's going to go along with that electrical equipment. The starboard tank's already been removed, and along this bulkhead I will build a new small day tank, maybe about 10 gallons, that will gravity feed the engine and the furnace. We could also consider that to be a clean tank, so all the appliances will draw from that, and it'll be fed from, let's call this the bunker tank. Potentially that could be less clean, and any fuel that comes out of there will be filtered going into the day tank and then filtered again coming out. So nothing but clean fuel to the engine and furnace. Turning out to be quite a project. There will be carpentry. I'm going to relocate the house batteries, and of course all the fuel system components will be rebuilt and replumbed. Okay, now I'll sign off, and we'll see you next month with another anchor test video. As always, anchor safely. So long.